while these statistics are sobering, it's like, what the heck, what can I do? I'm like doomed, but you're not doomed. And there's so much, and this is our message here, is that there's so much you can do to have agency over your wellness or agency over your child's wellness, because these things are largely improvable, supportable, overcomable, healable, reversible things.
I'm speaking with Dr. Will Cole, and Joseph and I are really excited about Dr. Cole being here as our guest, because we are looking for all kinds of different ways to educate parents of autistic children, even young adults, anybody that's living with autism. This is our work. So today we have Dr. Cole here. I'm super pumped. Would you give us a background on how you came to the field of medicine?
Yeah, so I grew up in a home that was interested in health and wellness, and I was a strange kid in many ways, let's be honest. I drank adaptogenic tonics in the 80s and 90s, and it was something that we did as a family. We ate strange, healthy foods. And it's interesting to see the evolution of the health industry since then, and like how many options we have today. We did not have that many options back then. It was very limited. You had 2 or 3 cereals, 2 or 3 versions of everything, if no options at all. So so that was the very formative years of my life. And then that evolved to me wanting to be trained in health and wellness. I didn't know it would look like functional medicine, but I went to an integrative medicine school, Southern California University of Health Sciences, outside of Los Angeles. And I heard of a guy called Datis Karazian, who had gone to my school. He's still today one of the leading functional medicine practitioners. He speaks for the Institute for Functional Medicine, and he'd gone to my school. He was older than I was. So that's kind of how it narrowed into, okay, health and wellness, alternative medicine, but being really focused in functional medicine, which really resonated with me as being the best of conventional medicine, which is being evidence-based, running labs, and doing your due diligence from an evidence-based standpoint, but also the best of alternative or integrative health. It's getting to the root cause. Why do you have the problem in the first place? And asking those questions and being vigilant with figuring out what is upstream. Why do I have this problem in the first place? And always asking that question, but backing it up with the best advancements in diagnostic testing and clinical nutrition and the advancements in the scientific literature, and applying that in people's lives. So I graduated knowing that's what I wanted to do. My postdoctorate education and training is in functional medicine and clinical nutrition. So I started out in telehealth right away. I'd be speaking or talking online about this field of healthcare. So we've always had a brick and mortar, quote unquote, clinic based in Pittsburgh, but we've always been a telehealth clinic for the past 12 years. And now it's a thing because of the current circumstances as far as the virus is concerned. But the reality is this is nothing new for us. We've always needed to do it because there would be other people in different states and countries that needed access to this amazing field of healthcare. So that's how it evolved. It was always an interest of mine, but I've been relentless over these past 12 years in democratizing functional medicine and really getting this to be accessible and reachable to people around the world.
Yeah, that is really cool. I love the difference in you growing up. I had a mother who didn't allow any junk food in the house. It wasn't probably to the extreme of yours, but it was a little different. But I'm so thankful now to my mother for just innately knowing, because back then, it was just her instinct. There wasn't a lot of stuff out there on it. So
no, certainly.
Yeah. So, and behalf of all the people who are listening in from a rural area, because I'm recording this from Mountain Home, Arkansas, I just want to say thank you, because on this journey of autism, I have really struggled. My oldest son is now 28, and it was really, really tough finding anything really to help him, because at that time we didn't have this awesome ability to be able to talk to people like you. So I've kind of been on this journey, and the way it's evolved is just amazing to me. And so you're a functional medicine doctor. And for those of you who don't know, and there's a lot of folks who don't know, can you explain to us like what that means and what the difference is with the mainstream doctor?
Yeah, sure. So the main differences between functional medicine and mainstream medicine, for everybody that's listening right now, they know when they get their labs or their kids' labs, they'll have their biomarker, their number on the lab, and a reference range that they're being compared to. That reference range is based on a statistical bell curve average of the population of that specific lab. So people have to ask the question, like, who are the people that are predominantly going to the labs that are being compared in that bell curve? It's people with health problems predominantly. So there's a lot of people that go to their doctor. They know intuitively this isn't right for their body. Like, there's something's not right here, or, hey, something's not right with my baby.
Yeah.
And something's going on here. I know my child. And the doctor says, everything's fine. You're just, everything's normal. If it's an adult, you're just depressed. Here's an antidepressant, or you're just getting older. You just need to lose weight. You're a new mom. All these reasons as to how could they be having symptoms despite quote unquote normal labs. But what their doctor is unintentionally telling them is that they're a lot like the other people with health problems that they're being compared to. And just because something's common doesn't necessarily mean it's normal. And comparing yourself to other people with health issues and then saying, let me get answers for myself, it is not helpful for many people. Many people fall through the cracks of that approach because there's a lot of gray areas. Health exists on a spectrum, and many things fall through the cracks of black and white, and you don't fit into our boxes, and then you're just labeled as depressed or a hypochondriac, or and you're made to feel like you're crazy in many ways. And in functional medicine, we're looking at a thinner interval of numbers, an X to Y interval within that larger reference range on that lab, to say, where is your body functioning the best? Where is optimal, vibrant health? That is the functional range. And we're looking at that standardized optimal healthy range and seeing where you're comparing to that. So the Cleveland Clinic's Functional Medicine Center, that's who's trained myself and everybody that's Institute for Functional Medicine trained and certified, and looking at that standardized number. So that's the first thing we do differently. That gives answers to people that are in the gray areas of the spectrum, that understand the nuances of why they feel the way that they do, why are they going through these issues. But we're also running more comprehensive labs. So it's based off of a comprehensive health history to determine what labs are the most relevant. So we're not just running labs for the sake of it, but we're being comprehensive, but still being practical in the sense that we're looking at things like gut issues and the impact that has on the immune system or your brain. We're looking at chronic infections that can drive inflammation levels up. We're looking at hormone imbalances that can impact your mood and your energy levels. We're looking at so many different variables that are the underlying pieces of the puzzle that make up that why they feel the way that they do. And then we realize we're all created differently in functional medicine too. And there's not a cookie cutter approach to getting well, because you could have 100 people with any set of issues, whether it's 100 people on the spectrum or 100 people with Hashimoto's autoimmune thyroid issues. And what's needed for one person is not needed for the next person. So you have to be, it's tailored and customized to the individual. So we use food as medicine. We use natural medicines based on these labs. We use advanced protocols based on these labs. We use medications when needed based on these labs to really be customized to the individual. So that's what it is. It's evidence-based alternative medicine. That would have been the way shorter version of what I just said, but it's a lot more nuanced than that.
Yeah. I think it's important to include everything you did, because for those listeners that aren't familiar with it, you know, as an autism mom, you're always looking for anything, right? So I think
Yeah.
it's important to know that there are other options out there.
Yeah.
Number one, before I move into autism, though, one of the messages, and it's a hard sell, by the way, for autism moms is I'm trying to get autism moms to take care of themselves first.
Mm.
Because I developed a lot of autoimmune problems. Thyroid, I became a type 1 at 39. And looking back, I was in fight or flight for years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And who knows why, but at the end of the day, the message is, had I have taken better care of myself, I
Mm-hmm.
think I would have been a much more energetic, show up for my kid kind of mom,
Mm-hmm.
um, instead of living in fear, 24/7.
Yeah.
So I know it's not like you said, a cookie cutter package, but if there's one thing, if anything, that you could say to an autism mom on that topic, what's your advice?
Well, I think first of all, giving yourself grace and a lightness to the fact that most moms in this situation are doing the best they can with where they're at right now and the bandwidth that they have. So I think a lot of times people and women around just their own bodies, let alone being a parent and the impact that that has. As a parent myself, I know that to be true. And seeing patients, I know that to be true too. But this is what I would say on a clinical level, in a real life, like what functional medicine, how does this impact my life sort of way? First of all, there's a growing number of evidence in the scientific literature looking at autoimmunity and its connection to autism. And there's a lot of moms, I have a lot of moms as patients that are on this autoimmune inflammation spectrum with things like Hashimoto's, autoimmune thyroiditis, and other autoimmune issues like type 1 diabetes, and their kids are on the spectrum. And there's a lot of mechanisms at play there that we could talk about, but we see this a lot. The child is a patient on the spectrum dealing with those issues, but the parents dealing with their autoimmune issues. And there's a growing number of evidence seeing autism as somewhere on this autoimmune inflammation spectrum too, just like the Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So I would say you need to not ignore it. These are check engine lights for yourself. And to be the best mom, to be the best caretaker, to be the best spouse, to be the best human being version of yourself, you can only give what you have. It's so cliched, but it's so like practical in your life that you have a lot that's required of you. And you can only give that fully and enjoy your life as much, you can only, when your bandwidth is very limited and you're giving so much, people are spent and they are exhausted and they are frazzled and they are their day is not a good quality day. They are just getting by and then just to go to sleep and do it all over again. So my job is to say, let's expand your bandwidth, because when you feel good, when you have more energy, you have a lot more to give and you'll be more resilient than you ever were feeling frazzled and so limited. So the analogy that I use for many people on the autoimmune inflammation spectrum, meaning the parents with autoimmunity issues like autoimmune thyroid issues and the kids, is like a mug. Like I have a mason jar here. Some people have big mugs, some people have small mugs. That's our genetic tolerance to stressors. And some people have massive mugs, right? And they can like eat whatever they want. They can go through all the stress. They're not sleeping well. I mean, they're just treating their bodies horribly and their mug's not overflowing. Many people on the spectrum, many people with autoimmunity inflammation spectrum issues is that their cups are smaller, the mugs are smaller, and they're overflowing a lot easier. And that's when symptoms arise, flare-ups happen, triggered of autoimmune issues like type 1 diabetes or autoimmune thyroiditis. That's when problems happen. You can't change your mug size, but you can change what you put into it. So my job is to say, okay, how can we understand that genetic tolerance? We look at methylation gene variants like MTHFR, which is quite associated with Hashimoto's and autism spectrum disorders, looking at that mug size, the genetic component of it, but that's just a third of the puzzle. 2/3 of the puzzle is epigenetics. It's the stuff we put in that mug. So it's the foods we're eating or we're not eating, our stress levels, toxins, gut problems, chronic viral issues, mold issues, Lyme co-infections, all these possibilities of what can overflow the mug. So I would just empower parents and lift them up and say, look, we have to know what we're up against to do something about it. And that applies to not just your baby, but to you. And that would be my message.
Wow, that's powerful. And I was just like, yes, yes. In my head, I was like, right on, because that is on point. And so, you know, for you autism moms out there, just take a second and absorb what that message is, because it's a life changer. And just like you said, it's going to change the quality of the life,
Yeah.
you know? And yeah, so autoimmune, you know, autism is growing. And from the functional medicine perspective, would you give us an understanding of what autism is? I know you've touched on it, but
yeah,
a little deeper.
Absolutely. And I think the larger understanding the spectrum, and in my second book, it's called The Inflammation Spectrum. So I talk about this in the book, but I want people to understand it's not linear. And it's far reaching with many different prongs to it. And we see autism as a whole as being a check engine light, the symptoms that we're talking about as a check engine light. So underneath the hood, so to speak, what's driving it for one person is not going to be driving it for the next person. So people have to understand, and that applies to any inflammatory problem. Whether that's inflammation against the brain or inflammation against the thyroid, inflammation against the joints or the digestive system, or a combination of factors. It's just a check engine light. So it definitely, when you have a lot of people, different people on the spectrum, we have to look at their differential pieces to their puzzle, because their pieces of the puzzle isn't necessarily going to be the next person's pieces of the puzzle. But I'll explain what are some of the common pieces of the puzzle that may be a component to a certain case, but health history and labs could really illuminate your specific pieces of the puzzle. So I don't want to be oversimplistic or reductionist to a complex, puzzle, but the commonality, no matter what puzzle you're looking at, I would say the commonality is inflammation in most of the cases. Inflammation is a product of the immune system. So in balance, inflammation is very important. Inflammation fights viruses. It kills off bacteria. It's a wondrous manifestation of the immune system. But it's when inflammation is thrown out of balance, it's the Goldilocks principle, not too high, not too low, but just right. And that homeostatic, balanced inflammatory response is important, but thrown out of balance, that's when problems arise. It's this forest fire that's burning in perpetuity in the body. And there's a spectrum. There's silent autoimmunity on one end, and then there's autoimmune reactivity, meaning you're having symptoms, but you don't fit all the criteria. And then there's the autoimmune disease, which, to be honest with you, there's a lot of people that don't ever get to that point where they're diagnosable in the standard model of care, but they're symptomatic. So research estimates that it's about 4 to 10 years prior to the diagnosis of the autoimmune disease when things were brewing on this autoimmune inflammation spectrum. So there's a growing number of researchers looking at what's referred to as the cytokine model of cognitive function. And cytokines are pro-inflammatory cells. So it's researchers looking at how inflammation is impacting how our brains work, how inflammation is impacting our mental health and our brain health. And the old view was that the brain was what was called immune privileged, so that there was no inflammatory response in the brain, that inflammation happens systemically, but not in the brain. But now researchers know that's not the truth at all, that the majority of brain cells, 90% of brain cells, are glial cells. And specifically the microglial cells is the brain's immune system that, in balance, just like with systemic inflammation, it cleans up neurons and makes sure the brain is pruned and optimal and healthy. But thrown out of balance, microglial cells will ravage neuroinflammation or brain inflammation, and it'll become an assassin really against neurons. That is one component, a breach of the blood-brain barrier, things passing through the blood-brain barrier that shouldn't be able to pass through, causing an hyperreaction or an overactivation of the glial cells, creating neuroinflammation. So that is one major component that we've found, and myself and other people in functional medicine and researchers looking at this as being a component to why autism is happening in a high level, because autoimmunity is happening in a high level. When you see abnormal tagging of neurological tissue against the brain, meaning the cytokines are attacking the brain because of something called molecular mimicry. It's sort of a case of mistaken identity when the immune system's tagging the brain cells as a foreign invader, as a virus or bacteria. And this loss of recognition of self is when the immune system starts overreacting against brain tissue. So is this a problem for everybody with autism? No, because you can have inflammation without it being autoimmunity, but all autoimmunity is inflammatory. So I would say whether we find an autoimmune component to the case or not, which we do see a lot, I would say more common is the obvious inflammatory component of the case and the connection between the gut and the brain. Our gut is formed from the same fetal tissue. When babies were growing in mom's womb, the gut and brain are formed from that same fetal tissue, and they are inextricably linked for the rest of their lives through what's known in the research as the gut-brain axis, or the connection between your gut and your brain. And your gut's even referred to, your intestines are even referred to as the second brain in the research. And 95% of serotonin is made in the gut, stored in the gut. And there's a bidirectional relationship, an intimate connection between the gut and the brain. And that's one of the reasons why researchers are looking at this gut component to kids on the spectrum and the impact that what is the second brain? How is the gut influencing how the brain works? And dysbiosis in the gut, pathogenic bacteria in the gut, and intestinal permeability or leaky gut syndrome. As somebody that can have leaky gut syndrome or things passing through the gut that shouldn't be able to pass through the gut, as somebody has that, they can also have what they refer to as leaky brain syndrome, or increased blood-brain barrier permeability, or the activation of those microglial cells, the brain's immune system. So those are the most common components that you would see clinically as having something not optimal there, some inflammatory component dealing with the gut-brain axis. Then the question is, what's driving the inflammation, what's insulting the microbiome, and that's when the differential labs come in to get the specific pieces to that person's puzzle.
Yeah, and so I'm coming from the autism mom perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm listening to all of this, and I'm just like, I'm fascinated. First of all, this is so awesome. And I wish I would have known all of this 20 years ago, but here we are now. And I have several questions, because if I'm an autism mom and my child is diagnosed, how do I know? What do I look for? Because like you said, it doesn't affect all autism children, adults.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we look for? How do we know to come see you?
Well, I think the bigger question is if you are going through symptoms and I'm applying this to adults, whether they're with their own inflammatory issues or their own autoimmune issues, or their children or someone else that they love, I would say if you know something's not right and you're doing everything that you know how to do and you're not getting where you need to be, if you're doing everything your doctor's telling you to do and you're still struggling with these issues, at that point, I would encourage them to get a different perspective, or at least a congruent, a perspective in addition to all the things that are being told as well, because we have to know what we're dealing with to do something about it. And many people are kind of shooting in the dark, trying the best they can, but they're spinning their wheels and they're stuck at these plateaus and they're not getting anywhere. And time goes by so quickly. I mean, it's like any parent, it's like, whoa, what the heck? Like months and years are flying by. I would just say it's like time is of the essence, and we have to, if you're waiting for the right time, it's now, because there's never going to be a perfect time when you have nothing else to do to just like worry about your health and like go and get labs done. But I would just implore them to seek out a functional medicine doctor. I mean, we consult people around the world. I love this stuff and finding out these pieces of the puzzle and running labs and giving people answers and guiding them through this process. So if they want to, they can check out drwillcole.com. We offer a free health evaluation if they are interested, but you can go to functionalmedicine.org. I mean, there's a lot of local doctors. If you don't want someone via webcam, there's a lot of great doctors at functionalmedicine.org. Just type in your zip code. So I would say that to not let your intuition be delegitimized, and do not let you be talked out of your intuition. Because I think that this is a broader problem with autoimmunity, not just moms that are being delegitimized. Moms as patients are being delegitimized because their symptoms are not being heard. So I see this all the time, and I want you to know that your intuition isn't lying to you. I very rarely have seen a mom whose intuition was lying to them. It just doesn't happen. And just because you don't get the answers and just because they don't have the answers for you doesn't make you not right. It just means you need to keep seeking, and whatever that looks like. Because when you can see measurable data from multiple labs' perspective, it's this bittersweet moment for them. And for me too, because it's like, okay, the last thing you want to say is you have all these issues going on, or your kid has all these issues going on. They already know something's not right. So the last thing they want me to say is everything looks good on these labs, when they know it's not good. So if anything, it's like, oh my gosh, the visit normally is filled with tears of joy, because it's like, whoa, like I'm not crazy. I knew something was off, and now we can deal with it because we have a baseline, objective baseline. So it's an awesome moment to be able to then give people these answers, because they already know something's off, but we can quantify it and we can do something about it.
Yes, and your passion is contagious. I'm I'm just like, yeah, because I everything that you just said, I can totally relate to. So I hope everyone heard that. And I have absolutely listened to your intuition 100%. And don't give up. I mean, I hope you guys heard that. Yeah. And I know we've touched on this just a little bit, but why do you, in your work, like we talked about autism, just, it keeps coming up. Since 1970, I know you mentioned in your article on your website that autism has skyrocketed since 1970. What do you think has caused this huge increase in autism diagnosis? I would love to hear what you have to say about that, because it's nuts. It's crazy what's going on.
It is. And I think like that when you look at those statistics that are given by different autism like societies and organizations, I mean, people, the skeptic will say, well, it's better diagnostics. Like that's why more people are being diagnosed. And I would agree with them that it's at least a part of it. Better diagnostics are part of it. But look, I think better diagnostics were born out of an obvious increase. If anything, I think that the way that medicine and these things work, the evolution of someone's better diagnostics or awareness is raised because more people are forcing the system to pay attention to what's going on. So yes, better diagnostics, but better diagnostics are in part driven by the numbers raising, because it's born out of necessity. So, and you look across the board, almost every autoimmune issue is raising. It's not just autism. You look at the numbers of Hashimoto's, autoimmune thyroiditis, you look at the numbers of type 1 diabetics, the numbers of fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, the numbers of MS, the numbers across the board. It's a lot of different autoimmune inflammatory problems. So to me, it's just lumped into this larger, what researchers refer to as a genetic epigenetic mismatch, because our genetics, researchers estimate that our DNA hasn't changed largely in 10,000 years, but yet our world has changed very dramatically in a very short period of time when in context with the totality of human existence. So our genome is in many ways living in a brave new world of being exposed to things that humans were never exposed to, and deficient in things that humans were never deficient in. And it is all of the things that are stressing are increasing, and all the things that were nourishing are decreasing. So that is what's awakening these genetic predispositions like never before in human history, because of this, what researchers refer to as this evolutionary mismatch, or this genetic epigenetic mismatch. So that is at the heart of a lot of research, not just with autism and that model of understanding it, this inflammatory model, but also other autoimmune issues too. So yeah, that's the main reason that I would say. And of course, there are outlying components for everybody, any unique case, yes. But if you're looking at the statistics as a whole, that would be the cornerstone of the problem.
Yeah, that's a lot to take in. But yeah, I can, that totally makes sense. The world is very, very different. How we eat, the quality of the food that we eat, and the lack of movement.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a whole thing there.
Yeah, it's the foods we're eating or the foods we're not eating. It's the soil depletion, like nutrient soil depletion, the things we're spraying on our crops, the hybridization, the genetic modification of certain foods. It is our stress levels, exposure to toxins, trauma. All of these things are a perfect storm. And that's why we have to be looking at all of these variables that I discussed at length in the inflammation spectrum, because I wanted people to realize, hey, look, inflammation is the commonality between all these health problems, and what can we do about it? And there's a lot of things we could do about it. So that's the other side of the coin, is that while these statistics are sobering, it's like, what the heck, what can I do? I'm like doomed, but you're not doomed. And there's so much, and this is our message here, is that there's so much you can do to have agency over your wellness, or agency over your child's wellness, because these things are largely improvable, supportable, overcomable, healable, reversible things. So there's a lot that you can do. And with the trickle down of understanding these issues more, the trickle down of better diagnostics, there's also more tools that we have as parents and as doctors than we've ever had before. So while, yes, the sobering statistic, yes, there's a big problem, the other side of the coin is we understand it a lot more now, and we can do something about it.
Yeah, and that's very hopeful, because that's with the way things are right now in the world. I love that. I love that boost you just gave us, because there are answers. And yeah, I mean, that's the good news.
Yeah. I mean, there was never podcasts like this 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I mean, look at the conversations that you are having. And I mean, this is such a amazing tool to like be a lifeline to a mom or a parent that is completely isolated and overwhelmed. So I think there's some amazing silver linings in all this noise.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's why I'm sure that's why you do this work. I'm sure that's why I'm doing my contribution to give back too. So I'm for those that had just had their child diagnosed. So I want to kind of get into, because I get this question a lot from autism moms. And anyone listening, if you're an educator, if you're tuning in just to learn more, this question is common. What are some of the specific steps that they should take in terms of testing to make sure that their child is optimally functioning at a biological level? Which that's a mouthful. So in layman's terms,
Yeah.
what can we do here? My child's diagnosed. What do I do? What are some specific steps they can take?
I think that sometimes if you're just diagnosed, sometimes you don't need lots of labs. Sometimes depending on the age of the child, you don't want to have a lot of labs ran. You know, it's just getting a lot of blood drawn on a little baby isn't necessarily the most practical thing. So sometimes you start with you get a good health history, and the health history tells you a lot. And then from there, you can make some sub-diagnostic decisions meaning like you don't have labs, but you have solid health history, you have questionnaires, we have some sort of baseline, and we lean into action steps with lifestyle changes to really move the needle in a powerful way. But yes, sometimes, if not the majority of the times, even when the kids are little, there's going to be some labs that I think would be helpful, that are practical and realistic and not over, it's not, it's completely realistic to do. So some basic blood tests, and then looking at the optimal ranges, not just the lab's reference range. So keep that in mind. So we put all the blood tests on a spreadsheet, and we're comparing it to where does optimal, feeling great, doing great look like, not just the lab's reference range. And then looking at more comprehensive labs like stool test. I think that's a very practical test for most kids to do. And a toxin test, oftentimes many practical, and sometimes some genetic tests are helpful to understand things like MTHFR and other genetic variants that can predispose to increased levels of inflammation, like homocysteine, which homocysteine is an amino acid that's pro-inflammatory, but higher levels are associated in some studies to increase the blood-brain barrier permeability, or driving that neuroinflammation, the brain inflammation that I talked about. And that's also associated with autoimmune thyroid issues too, the MTHFR gene. So that gene variant, I should say. So we look at these heterozygous or homozygous gene variants that are just slower versions of the normal gene variant, or the most common one. And does that mean that everybody with MTHFR gene variants are going to get autism? Everybody's going to get Hashimoto's disease? No, it just means that most people on the spectrum and Hashimoto's have those gene variants. So you're looking at these gene predispositions. I have a double MTHFR gene variant too, but I don't have autoimmune issues, but I have autoimmune issues on both sides of my family. I have family history of autoimmune thyroid issues, type 1 diabetes on both sides, autoimmune thyroid issues on both sides, MS issues on both sides. So very, very common. But so by knowing these gene variants, you can support your body in areas that where it's a little bit more sluggish. And MTHFR is just one of them, but there's a lot more than that. So I would say being targeted, succinct, what's the most relevant, impactful labs? Like the analogy that I use is, what are the stones that are most likely to have something underneath it? So we're being comprehensive for the child, but not being excessive with the testing for a child. So that's really what I would say, is once you lead into this stuff, if you're getting a qualified functional medicine practitioner, our heart on this and our passion on this is making this as user-friendly and as practical and helpful as possible. So it's not overwhelming. Actually, it's a sigh of relief for many parents, because they're like, oh my gosh, I don't have to figure this out myself. You can like pass that baton of stress, if you will, onto somebody else. You can just be the best parent you can be, and not having to be mom, doctor, chef, all these things, all these hats you have to be on. You can actually take the doctor hat off for a while, if not forever.
Yeah, that's great. As parents are listening, or anybody who has anyone close to them that's living on the spectrum. So we get these, we figure all this out. We've looked under the stones. We have a good idea of what's going on. So how can the parents support the child then once? How can we support the child on this journey once we find all these?
Well, I think it's having, I mean, sometimes the visits via webcam are just the parents, and it's me educating them. And a lot of times depending on the age of the child's involved or not, just to get them equipped. Because sometimes it's not the message, but the messenger. And if the parent is saying it, it's one thing, but it's like, oh, Dr. Will Cole on a webcam, he could say the same thing, but it's like, oh my gosh, mom, I'm going to do this. Like, this is like the thing. It's Dr. Cole said to do it. It wasn't because you had to say it. So that's helpful too. I think getting the family involved as much as possible is like a very exciting thing, because everybody's on the same page. It's supportive, it's collaborative, and there's no division in the family. Even if it's like the grandparents are watching the kids on a regular basis, then we get the grandparents involved, because they have to be on the same page. Like if we're making changes in our life, but grandma's like doing this and they mean well, they just don't know any better. We have to educate all the caretakers that are involved. So it's education, it's empowerment, and it's integrating these practices and protocols in their life.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And yeah, so when we're building our support teams, and I coach a lot of autism moms, and I'm like, let's look at what support you have, right? And so moving forward, you're going to make all these changes. And one of the things that come up a lot is diet. I don't even like that word, but for this conversation, what you how you nourish your body. And a lot of kids on the spectrum have sensory issues. So, I mean, parents are just feeding them whatever they'll eat. But what kinds of foods, what kinds of nutritional advice do you have for kids that are on the spectrum?
Yeah, and that's another thing too. We build that from scratch based off of those labs and based off of the health history, because not every kid has to do the same intervention. But food is medicine, and every food we eat either feeds inflammation or fights it. So it's going to be a piece of the puzzle for everybody. And for some people, it's a massive piece of the puzzle. And for some people, it's like an average. Like, yes, it's going to do something, but it's not everything. And some people, it's a small piece of the puzzle because maybe they've done everything, but they're still struggling. So there's all different things on the spectrum, and all those pieces of the puzzle look different sized. And sometimes the food size puzzle piece is not always the only puzzle piece. Most of the time it's not, but it is normally a component to look at. So I actually, in the inflammation spectrum, I refer to it as the core four. These are the 4 foods that are most likely to disrupt the microbiome in people with neuroinflammation or brain inflammation, or you could say thyroid inflammation too, or any other autoimmune issue. So that's going to be grains, namely gluten-containing grains like wheat, rye, spelt, barley. But really, all grains have proteins that can irritate the immune system, especially people with smaller mugs. The mug's already overflowing. It's like, okay, you're stressing out an already overflowing mug sometimes. So grains, added sugar, which most people know that already, but that it's to disrupt the microbiome, raise inflammation, raise insulin, disrupt blood sugar balance, which is really anathema to brain health. Third would be industrial seed oils like canola oil, vegetable oil. Disruptors of the microbiome, can be rancid at heat, exposed to heat and light, and raising inflammation levels. And fourth would be dairy. Conventional dairy, obviously more obvious, but we have a nuanced conversation in the book that, because, I mean, not all dairy is raised equally. So there's beta A2 casein, and you see the growing amounts of A2 milk. And I talk about the science of that in the book, where that is the more ancient version of the protein, the dairy protein beta A2 casein. So again, back to that genetic epigenetic mismatch, our genome as humans would have been used to having some of that A2 milk for thousands of years, but yet because of crossbreeding of cows and modern farming practices, most of the cows that people are drinking today, or most of the dairy from cows that people are drinking today, are beta A1 casein, which researchers are looking at as that being the dairy reactivity. So it's not the dairy as much as what we've done to the poor cow over a long time. So that is a nuanced conversation. And goat's milk and camel milk and anything else you can milk, I'm sure. But that we look at all the different types of it, and the fermented versus the grass-fed, all that stuff. We look at all of it. But for the sake of conversation and being oversimplistic, I'll just say dairy. But there's definitely better versions of dairy. So that's the core 4. The 4 foods that are most likely to disrupt your microbiome, your second brain, raise inflammation in your actual brain, and systemically. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I like how you broke that down, because that's really easy to remember, and because there's so much information, researching what to do with our kids on the spectrum, right? And so that's great. That's a great way to break it down. Great beginning. Those 4 core foods. Or not foods. Sugar's not a food.
Yeah, food. Yeah, some people consider them foods, probably. But
yeah, I know.
a bowl of sugar, I'm sure. But
a bowl of cereal.
Yeah.
Anyway, my kids can vouch that they were so deprived from cereal. Uh, right. Yeah.
Deprived or thrived, and I guess it's perspective, right?
So working with kids on the spectrum, how is, in your experience, how has functional medicine helped them?
Well, it reclaims what's lost. It reclaims what they never had to begin with. So I think it's powerful tool. It is a powerful tool in the toolbox. And I think, is it the only tool? No, I think that you need a lot of different tools. I mean, therapists and support groups and functional medicine. I think all of these things work together. Another word for functional medicine is integrative medicine. So we are collaborators, we are integrators of all these amazing tools. But yeah, it is such a powerful tool, and it's really amazing to see somebody, a family, like I can't tell you how often this happens, like on an almost hourly basis, moms that are just crying, but not sad tears anymore. They're just like, oh my gosh, I have answers. Like I was doing this all alone, immersed in Dr. Google for hours on end, finally have a voice and action plan to do something about it. So it is a very powerful thing. I love it. I mean, how can I not get excited about this? I get to come and do this 10 hours a day. It's so much fun it's not a quick fix. I don't want to make light of it. It's a journey with ups and downs, but it's a journey that's necessary.
Well, and it is, and autism is a journey too. That's why it's so important to have a good foundation, get a good start, feel better, have more energy, because we are on a journey. And you have a new book that just came out called The Inflammation Spectrum, which, yes, hello, which has praises from the experts in the holistic medicine. So I know when talking a lot about inflammation and immune disorders and so forth, but can you briefly tell us about your book?
Yeah, the inflammation spectrum is out, and I guess by the time people hear this, I've been like writing. I live and breathe this stuff. So my third book's actually coming out too. It's called Intuitive Fasting, and I talked about intuition back there earlier in the conversation. So I really wanted a book that's kind of a part 2 of the inflammation spectrum. It'll be out in February 2021. I'm sure when people hear this, it'll be on pre-order already, and yeah, so they're all explorations of functional medicine. So the inflammation spectrum with my first book is Ketotarian. It's a mostly plant-based ketogenic book, which research is very exciting about around beta hydroxybutyrate, the ketone, and kids on the spectrum, and other autoimmune issues and lowering neuroinflammation. So then at that point, I wanted to talk about a deeper dive of inflammation with the inflammation spectrum, but then a third tool to consider is intermittent fasting and the impact that can have on the gut microbiome and mitochondrial function and lowering neuroinflammation, increasing stem cells, all these amazing things that you want for the brain and your immune system. So, I mean, the books really, for all 3 of the books, are all amazing tools for families with kids on the spectrum or families with autoimmunity.
Yeah, I love that. I was just thinking, okay, I personally love books because I'm a processor, so I can always go back to the book and get a refresher on it. So those 3 books are now in my library. Just FYI, and I hope anyone listening, look, we're always looking for resources. We're always looking for things that we personally can do to improve our lives. So I'm excited about your work. I'm excited about these books, and I'm also thankful to have these resources because I've been looking a long time. So I would love to know, you've had a lot of experience. What is your best advice for autism moms?
Well, I think this is applicable to, like I mentioned, intuition, and it's a major cornerstone, a major foundation to a lot, I think, of sustainable wellness. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to put the title of my third book is Intuitive Fasting, because I want people to sort of raise up their intuition in their life to better their health, their families, and their lives. But I would say the best advice that I would say, because I think it's the genesis of sustainable wellness, is really you can't heal a body you hate. And that applies to you as a parent. You are so stressed out about all these things in your life, but you end up feeling like this sort of, you're either ignoring yourself, dreading dealing with what you're dealing with. And it's just such a point of contention and resentment. And understandably so. I get it. But you have to ultimately heal your relationship with yourself, heal your relationship with your body, which takes time. This is not a quick fix thing, but it's a journey that needs to start to be repaired, because at that point, that earlier statement that I mentioned, you can only give what you have. It's truly, really true. So your cup's overflowing right now, and we have to start emptying the cup out so you aren't so at maximum capacity. Because when your mug is emptied, you have a lot more to give, and you're not so stretched so thinly, and you can really give a lot more, and you have more capacity. So that's what I would say, is using self-care and all these tools that I'm mentioning in this conversation, using self-care as a form of self-respect. Because I think a lot of moms they're not meaning to do this, but they're the last on the list. They're on the back burner, and they have to kind of, again, repair what's going in their life. And yes, they probably are going to have to do that simultaneously with things they have to do as a mom, but they have to do it simultaneously. And over time, as they feel better and they have more energy and they're doing all these things, you believe me, you have a lot more to give. And it's a lot more seamless. It's not such an uphill going against the current in muddy waters, because it's just a lot more effortless because you have more resilience. So that's what I would say to any parent or anybody really that's going through these issues.
Yeah, and that's the coaching that I do, and it's a real paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite thing is when exactly what you said, when they have that aha, that, oh my gosh,
Mm-hmm.
I do have time. I do have time.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big
Yeah.
excuse, right? I don't
Oh
have
yeah.
time to take care of myself. I just don't.
Yeah.
And then when you break it down and you make, you start using these tools, that's one of my reasons I keep coming back and doing this, is just to see the lights come on and like
Right.
their life
Yes.
changes in that moment.
Right. They don't have time not to,
Yeah.
really. I mean, it's like, if you don't make time now, you're going to be forced to at some point.
Yeah. True. All
Yeah.
truth.
Yeah.
So, is there anything you would like to mention before we go that I may have not asked you?
I think we talked about it all. I really appreciate the opportunity. If people want to learn more about what my work is, we offer a free webcam or phone health evaluation at drwillcole.com. That's drwillcole.com. They can pre-order Intuitive Fasting, my third book. And yeah, that's what I'm excited about right now.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge, your expertise, and really having your heart engaged and your passion engaged in your message, because it was very, very powerful. So thank you.
Thank you so much.